Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everybody. This is Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good morning. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta, a Thursday morning, August the 26th. I'm happy to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, and we're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com, and chat room is open if anybody's awake and would like to sit in there. And I'm just having some coffee and waking up again, as usual. I want to continue talking about toxic shame. I'm just finding this very interesting, and look, I want to get a copy of John Bradshaw's book, but this website has some good information on there, and that's www.hope4survivors.com. And there's some really great information on there about toxic shame and about John Bradshaw's book, Healing the Shame That Binds Us. And I'm going to continue looking at this for another few days and see how far we get. And so I appreciate everybody who's tuning in, and hopefully it's helpful for you too. I'm not a professional counselor or therapist. I don't hold any counseling certificates or anything like that. I'm just a private person who does my own blog talk shows, and like I say on every show, just so everybody knows. And you have to listen at your own discretion. The topics of abuse are very sensitive, and so you have to know how far along you are in your healing journey, if it's comfortable for you to listen to or not. And if you think the topic might bother you, you just have to turn the show off, right? It won't be hurting my feelings at all. And young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have someone listen to the show with you. You have to be very safe and very careful what you're doing online. And I think there's a lot of adult content on my shows, even though it's ultimately about child abuse and stopping child abuse and whatnot. The material is quite adult-oriented. And so I don't know how young the people are listening to my shows. So if you're a young person under the age of 18, I just ask that you have someone listen to the show with you, and just to see if it's something that you should be listening to, and also to help you if you have questions about the material. Because, these types of issues are not talked about a whole lot out in the public, out in the schools and in the homes, right? Nobody really wants to deal with this stuff. It's very, it's upsetting, right? So nobody likes to talk about abuse and what happens to children after, when they grow up and have these adult survivor issues because of it. And so, we only hear about the headlines, right, of what's happening day to day, when children are losing their lives or being killed and or they're in the hospital due to abuse-related injuries, right? That's about all we ever hear about. So, you want to be sure and have someone listen to the show with you, just to make sure that you should be listening to it, right? So important. And so we'll get right into this article. We left off yesterday talking about toxic shame and the different sort of ways that it manifests in people's lives, and how it sort of intertwines in there because of abuse and whatnot, right? And this website, it's pretty good. I like the information. It's very helpful for me. And it was written by a survivor of child abuse called Hope for Us. And Hope for Us is a survivor of childhood physical, sexual, emotional, and ritualistic abuse. She is currently writing a book on the subject that will include other self-help ideas like this. And we need to check out this website here, www.hopeforsurvivors.com. /shame.html. There's there's links on the bottom that you can get a hold of her, and also information about her. And this is the lady that wrote this, that's actually written this stuff here. But she's going by what John Bradshaw said in his book. So she's read his book, and she went and created these web pages based on what John Bradshaw had said about toxic shame, right? And so we left off yesterday talking about the different characteristics, like the way that it kind of takes on different characteristics in people's lives, dealing with shame. Narcissistic personality disorder, paranoid personality. She lists here offender criminal behavior, grandiosity, disabled will, toxic shame, and spiritual bankruptcy. And then the next portion that I want to look at is the family system, and I think this is one that really interests me just because of the type of family that I grew up in, dysfunctional family. And it says the family system, dysfunctional families, and I'm just reading right from the page, and you can go there too if you'd like and check this out. Toxic shame is an interpersonal problem. It originates primarily in significant relationships, and our most significant relationships are those with our original families. Shame-based families and multi-generational illness. Toxic shame is most often multi-generational. Family secrets can go back many generations and can be carried forward generation after generation. And since these secrets are kept hidden, they never get worked out. Isn't that the truth, right? I know in my family that's the situation because my parents were abused, right? My mom used to talk about a lot of her abuse when talking about my grandmother, but my dad, his is very much secretive. He doesn't talk too much about what was going on with them. The only issue is that I know there had to have been some problems, you know what I mean, because the family's very hush-hush. And the dad, his father, my grandfather, actually left the family of like 10 kids and a wife to go live in this shack in the mountains, supposedly because he had TB, but my dad says no, he didn't have TB, that he wanted to go live out there because he wanted to play the piano, and he felt that the kids were destroying his chances of being a piano player. So what this had to do with the shack out in the woods, I just don't know. But there were some serious problems there with the family, and I just don't know, what happened there, because their whole family is very secretive about their childhood, right? Whereas my mom was just blabbing it out there, telling what my grandmother did to her and her other children, right? My mom's siblings. So, my mom was very open about what happened to her because she was very upset about it and very angry about it. And my dad is very secretive about it, and he suffers from borderline schizophrenia and other things. And my grandparents were first cousins. His parents, my dad's parents, were first cousins when they married and had these children, right? So that's always a bad thing. Second cousins, third cousins, not such a big deal, but first cousins, not a good idea. And so my dad's first cousins married each other and had children. Of course, this was back in like 1800s. My grandparents were born in the late 1800s, so they were pretty backward-thinking people back there in the woods, and they probably didn't think they knew there was probably not a good idea, but they did it anyway. Maybe because they could not find my grandmother, a suitable husband, so they just married her. She just married her cousin, right? So this is not a good thing, right? So this is why, my dad's side of the family all have brain tumors. They have a lot of mental anxiety issues, and they have a lot of, almost all of my dad's siblings, there was 10 of them, they have, what do you want to call that, dementia, and a lot of problems with Alzheimer's, but they all had brain tumors. And some of my dad's siblings had these brain tumors removed. And my dad had one removed when he was just a tiny baby by a physician who was not really capable of brain surgery. You know what I mean? Back in like 1925. So this is the thing. There's some problems there on my dad's side. And multi-generational, who knows how far back it goes, right? We have family trees all the way back to like 1700s or whatever. But the thing is who knows really what was going on, because family secrets go way back, right? And nobody wants to talk about it. That's why I'm talking about it. And this will never change as long as we keep silence. As long as abusers can keep us silent, then they get to continue doing what they do. They will never be caught. And they just get to go on and abuse their children and other people. And survivors of child abuse living in silence, right? It's hard to heal that way. It's really hard to move on and move forward. Some people may be able to do it, and I wish them well. And for me, I could never do it because I needed to get this out. I needed to express my feelings on the whole thing, and I needed to let people. I joined a couple of adult survivor groups for child abuse not too long ago, about a year ago, and that was very helpful for me to talk to people who had been through some similar things and who were still working on their healing journey. And it was very helpful to talk to them and to see, hey, I wasn't alone. And, if I needed to talk or was having a bad day, I'd just, pop online and talk to them, and they'd talk to me and tell me about their day. And it was just great to have somebody to talk to, because so often in our families, we don't have family members who are on the healing journey, right? They're in denial. So you can't sometimes work these things out within the family because people are living in denial. And that's just bad. Shame-based marriage and parental models, they say these dysfunctional families are created when shame-based people find and marry each other. Most often, these shame-based couples consist of codependent adults looking to the other to parent the wounded child within them. Excuse me. So these two people, they're codependent. They get together, they get married because they think that each other will be able to help them to heal their own wounds, right? To heal their own issues with child abuse or with dysfunction or whatever, right? And it turns out that neither one can do that, right? That's hard, and that's where I came from, with two parents who were, not abused as children and who never got help. And so they thought that each other could help each other out, and it turned out to be disastrous. So I've seen this firsthand. That's why I find this information very interesting. Dysfunctional family rules. She lists off here control, perfectionism, blame, denial of the 5 freedoms, and talks about the no-talk rule, don't make mistakes rule, and unreliability, right? So we'll go through those quickly here. Control. Control is a major defense mechanism for shame. Perfectionism. Family members live according to an external image of perfection, which is impossible to achieve, and therefore no one ever measures up within the family, right? Blame. Blame is another defense cover-up for shame. When control breaks down, blame takes over, and blame can be placed on oneself or others. And dysfunctional family rules, right? This would be like control, power and control within the family. Perfectionism. Perfectionism was not something that our family had to deal with, But I've known people who have had that and lived with that type of thing, right? Perfectionism, and that, no one ever measures up in that instance, right? But blame, that's something that definitely was a problem in our family for dysfunctional family rules. Blame was something that was absolutely ridiculous. My mom was always blaming my dad for all of her problems and all the children's problems. She was my main abuser, right? So like my mom was always blaming my dad and saying, "Oh, he's just crazy," and look what he did to my boys, and blah blah blah, and all this stuff. In the meantime, she was abusing me. And then my dad would blame my mom and say, "Well, your mother's just crazy, and she's going to kill you, and she's just crazy. We should leave and go to California." They were always playing the blame game, and I think a lot of people do that. And you see this in a lot of divorces and whatnot. People don't want to take responsibility for their own actions. And if you can't be truthful and honest, sometimes we have to be shown what we're doing. We might not realize what we're doing, and then that's a different thing. But, when we know that we're responsible for a certain type of behavior, or we're behaving a certain way, and then somebody calls us out on it and says, "Hey, you're behaving this way, it's not right," and then people just deny it and they blame somebody else, that's what a lot of people do, because they don't want to own up and take responsibility for their own actions. And my parents were two of the big examples of that, right? My mom was always accusing my dad of being this abusive man, right, which he was, but, she was my abuser. So, you know what I mean? So it didn't fly very far with me, because I was just like, well, look at yourself, And so, her trying to blame my dad didn't do any good, and my dad, same thing, trying to blame my mom for all these problems in the family, and I knew very well that he was one half of the cause. The two of them were each one half of the cause. So, it was absolutely ridiculous for them to blame each other. They should have taken a look at their own behavior, sat down and said, "Look, we have to change this for our children. Our children are suffering. We're not doing the right thing by them, and we're not doing the right thing by each other. We really need help." And they were told to get court-ordered counseling when DHS or CPS stepped in when I was a toddler. And they went a couple times to counseling, and then that was it. So they had the choice. And they chose to live this ridiculous, dysfunctional lifestyle because that's all they knew. They grew up like that, and they were uneducated, very ignorant, and it's unfortunate. My mom was very smart, and so was my dad. But they didn't have a lot of schooling growing up in the back hills of Nova Scotia, right, in 1930s, you know what I mean? The Depression era, and a lot of abuse, right? So they had a rough start, But they could have got help. They didn't want to get help. They just wanted to continue living in this dysfunction, and which caused our family to be destroyed, right? So that's why, when people choose to stay in this dysfunction, that's their own choice. When you have a chance to get out of it and to get yourself some help as an adult, especially if you have children, then you have to be responsible for your behavior, and you have to make sure that you get that help and that you get yourself and your family some help, right? As the adults are the responsible people here, and they are the ones to blame every single time if it's the adults who are causing the problems within the family, right? It's never the children's fault. It could never be the child's fault, right? So this whole blame thing, people need to start taking personal accountability for their behavior, and that's all there is to it. Number 4, denial of the 5 freedoms. These 5 freedoms represent a basic human power, which is the power to perceive, the power to think and interpret, the power to feel, the power to desire, to want and choose, and the power to imagine. And it says this rule denies the true self of each family member. It demands that you not perceive, think, feel, desire, or imagine the way you truly do, but the way the dysfunctional family rules require you to, often a perfectionist ideal. So thinking like the dysfunctional family instead of our own desires, how we feel, how we imagine things, how we perceive things. It's like perceiving things as this dysfunctional family member role that we might take on, right, as when we grow up in a dysfunctional family. So then you kind of you never really get to discover yourself when you're doing that, right, because you're just thinking like that dysfunctional family is thinking and feeling, right? And I guess everybody kind of gets sucked into that. If you grow up in an abusive environment, a dysfunctional environment, it's sort of bound to happen, right? And later on, we can change this. And we don't have to keep to perceive things the way our dysfunctional family perceives things. We don't have to think and interpret things the way that our dysfunctional family thinks and interprets things. We can choose to have our own thoughts and perceive things the way that we want to perceive them and feel and desire, right? And to imagine things the way that we imagine them instead of our dysfunctional family. So it's very important not to, this whole codependency thing. I think that's a lot, has a lot to do with that, where people are just so codependent within the family because of what's going on that they don't even have their own thoughts. Their own thoughts don't even count. It's just what the family wants. It's what the other family members, that their ideas are what's important. What their needs are what's important. This whole codependent thing, it's just garbage. And so for parents, to put that on their children is extremely wrong, to deny the 5 freedoms. And so, we have the choice as adults to get this back for ourselves. And I started perceiving and thinking, interpreting and feeling and desiring and imagining a long time ago differently than the rest of my family, and that's why we split off, and that's why I was kind of lumped as the black sheep of the family, because I didn't want to go along with the garbage that my parents were putting on me. I spoke out very, very loudly against the treatment that my dad was treating my mom, including trying to protect her and smacking my dad with a bat, I was, and I was, 9 years old, or, couldn't have been more than 9, 8, or I had to be about 8 or 9. So, yeah, that's absolutely ridiculous. We have to have our own, it's important for us to be able to think and interpret and perceive things the way that we do. We're all individuals, right? The no-talk rule, this is really something here. This rule denies the expression of the true self. It prohibits the full expression of any feeling, need, or want. The no-talk rule, and that's like if parents say, "Oh, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it." As soon as a child starts speaking out about something that they want to do or something that they want to see happening or their needs or wants, or feelings, and the parents are like, "Oh, I don't want to hear that. We're not talking about that," and That's very much common in dysfunctional families. Well, we're not going to discuss that. We're not talking about that. And our family did that all the time. My mom was famous for that. She would be allowed to express herself, but nobody else could express themselves. So she could tell you everything she wanted to. She could call you names and berate you and make you feel like so low, and then you were not allowed to say anything about it. And that's where the physical beatings came in, right? Because if you opened your mouth, you're quite often going to be beaten. So, you just sit there and take it, And if you have a wrong look on your face, then you're really in trouble. So, that whole no-talk thing. And, saying, oh, we're not going to talk about this. We're not discussing this with anybody. And, we were told quite often as children growing up, me and my sister especially, that we were never to talk about anything that was going on in the family to anyone. And, we were keeping all this to ourselves, right? And, of course, because my parents were brought up on charges of child abuse, right? So they didn't want this getting out to anybody because I don't know why they wanted to keep the kids, right? My mom begged and pleaded the courts to let her be able to keep her children. She begged and pleaded. She said that, she told the judge that these are all I have. My children are all I have, because I don't know why my parents didn't get a divorce, but my mom tried to divorce them in Canada years and years ago in the 40s. They wouldn't let her because there was no infidelity, right? So They didn't care about the abuse. My mom was explaining how he was treating the kids and her, and the judges were just like, oh well, that's just a marital problem. You have to work that out. But since there's no infidelity, you can't divorce him, right? That was back in like 1940, whatever. In Canada, they were not granting divorces for the for abuse, right? It was only for infidelity. So the abuse continued on, right? And this whole issue, that they could have got divorced later. My mom didn't even have to divorce him. She could have just left him, separated, But she didn't. She didn't. So she chose to stay in this horrible marriage, and then got to express herself. But nobody else was allowed to express themselves within the family, right? So it was always about her needs and her wants. The minute we said most of the beatings that I took were because I said that I needed something. If I said, oh, I need something at school for books or whatever, she'd be like, do you think we have money? And of course, a beating would come. I need stuff for school supplies. That would cause a beating, right? Because she didn't have any money, so she certainly didn't want to have to deal with trying to go to my dad for a few bucks for school supplies, right? So or if I needed $5 to go to the movies or something, which back then it would have been like $2, right? This kind of stuff, my needs or wants. If I was sick in the middle of the night, she wouldn't be loving and caring about it. She would be abusive, right? So this is the thing, right? It was mostly because if anybody's needs got mentioned besides hers, then they were in trouble, and that was my mom, right? Very, very sick woman. So number 6, don't make rules. Don't make mistakes. This is another rule for dysfunctional families. Mistakes reveal our flawed human self. Acknowledging mistakes opens the family up to scrutiny. And this rule requires that you cover up your own mistakes, and if someone else makes a mistake, you are required to shame them. And so, that's something I totally see, happening in a lot of families. And people often think, they just say, well, our family, we don't make mistakes, we're perfect. And if somebody does, then they're just labeled the black sheep of the family, right? Or well, that we lost one, because this child is just the black sheep of the family, and the rest of my kids are just perfect, right? Which is absolutely not true, because there's no such thing as perfection on this earth, I tell you that. So this whole idea that families don't make mistakes is just ridiculous. Our parents were, I think that my dad, when he was younger, probably liked to think that his work buddies and stuff would never find out about the reality of his home life and the way he was treating his wife and children, because supposedly, he was always painting this picture perfect thing to his buddies in the Air Force, And like my parents, my mom would say that, they wouldn't have any food in the cupboards, no, like one potato. And my dad would come home with new furniture because he wanted to impress his Air Force buddies, right? Because my dad was in the service up here in Canada for years, and moving around different bases. My parents moved around a lot. They moved around all the time, changing, different military bases, right, within Canada. So this was back in World War II, right? And so, he was always buying furniture and stuff, but he would never come home with any food or anything for the kids or for my mom. Right, and it was like, because he wanted people to see this different, this false reality of what the family was like, and then of course if anybody would have found out about the real issues, that he was mentally ill and that he was abusing his family, well, everybody would look at his family and be like, whoa, with scrutiny, you know what I mean? They would be looking at them, so they always had to cover up their mistakes and I'd try to make out that they were just this normal family when they weren't, And we did that our whole entire lives, except for the block that we lived on for 18 years, except for we moved away when we moved to Canada, right? And then we moved back, right? But we didn't live, we were off the block for a few years in that period of time, like 5 years. So 13 years we lived on that block, and with the same neighbors, the same people. And they knew our family, you better believe they did. They tried to avoid us most of the time, and they didn't want, me and my sister were allowed to hang around at some of their houses, right? But they were not allowed to. Their children were not allowed to come to our house because their parents knew what was going on in our home, and so we couldn't really hide it there. But I know there's lots of families that have this picture perfect look. They look so perfect from the outside, and on the inside it's not perfect because there's no such thing. And then if children within the home make a mistake, then the rest of the family is required to shame them. And I've seen this, firsthand. And people, quite often will lump family members in with others, and they'll say, well, you're just like your brothers, or you're just like your sister, or you're just like your dad, or whatever, trying to make them feel bad because of their behavior, right? This whole scrutiny and making people feel bad, right? And that's a whole shame thing, and that's just bad because that shame doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the people that put it on us, right? It's their shame, not ours. Unreliability says, don't trust anyone and you'll never be disappointed. Parents in the dysfunctional family did not get their developmental needs met as children, and they won't be there for their own children's needs. The cycle of distrust is perpetuated. That's don't trust anyone and you'll never be disappointed, it says here. Parents in the dysfunctional family did not get their needs met, so they don't meet their own children's needs. And I mean, that's not true in every single case, because we know that all people, who have been abused, not all of them will go on to abuse their children, because many people will get help, and even if it's self-help, and they will be the best parents. I mean, I've actually seen this firsthand. And so, it's not true that all abused people will go on to abuse their families, but they will if they don't break the cycle. They will if they don't get some help, right? And that's what my parents did. They did not get any help, and so they abused their children. Certain family members of mine did the same thing. Not all, because there wasn't very many grandchildren, right? But one of my sisters, and I would say my brother's behavior was abusive towards my nephew, because he would physically go fly off the handle and beat on him, and that's not right. And you can't make that right in my book. I don't care what book anybody has, it's just not right. You know what I mean? It's abuse is what it is. But this whole cycle of distrust, and that's what our parents put on us. They were like, well, we're not going to talk to anybody about our stuff, because they were brought up on charges, right? So they didn't want the children going around blabbing to anybody what was going on in the home. And so, that's the whole issue, right? They would brainwash us. They told us, people, they just want our information. And if they get our information about what's going on in the family, they'll just use it to hurt us. And this was something that we heard all the time, because my parents were always kind of talking about suicide and killing themselves. And my dad would, he wasn't always trying to kill himself, but the odd time, and he was sometimes trying to kill us, and it was absolutely amazing that we actually made it. But the thing is some of us didn't, right? But the sad thing is that, the kids, the older children, like my brothers, would talk to my parents. They'd be like, you guys should just get some help. You should get some help and help yourselves. You know what I mean? Everybody was suffering in that home. I mean, it didn't matter which home we lived in. We were all suffering. And, my parents would be like, well, no, because if we go to counseling, if I get help, they'll just use my information against me, right? So they just brainwashed us with that stuff all the time. So we grew up thinking, oh, no, we just keep this to ourselves, a cycle of distrust. Don't trust anybody, right? Certainly didn't trust our parents, didn't trust our adult figures, right? I never trusted anybody. I didn't trust teachers. I didn't trust anybody, period. When you grow up around that from day one, being born into it, that's just how you are, right? So it took me a long time to get to trust people, until I met some decent people and actually started to realize, hey, there are good people out there. You know what I mean? It's very, very hard on people, right? It says, don't trust anyone and you'll never be disappointed. Isn't that something? And that's a bad way to grow up. That's a bad way to teach your children, right? The next portions of this is called abandonment, physical desertion, emotional abandonment, abandonment through abuse, and then they talk about sexual abuse. It's a great article. I hope you will go there, www.hope4survivors.com. So it's hope4survivors.com, but it's not for F-O-R, it's for the number 4, right? So hope4survivors.com /shame.html. And then they talk about emotional sexual abuse, right? They go on to talk about, she writes up stuff here about physical abuse, emotional abuse. This is what we're going to cover tomorrow, all of this, the rest of this stuff here. I don't know if we'll be able to finish it all, but it's some really good information. Social shame, and talking about the cultural system. And she just goes on and on here. This is some very good information. I hope you will check it out. So we have about a minute left. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Tonight, Elizabeth Brawley will be on Dreamcatchers Talk Radio, www.blogtalkradio.com /Dreamcatchers, and 10 o'clock p.m. Standard Time. Don't miss Elizabeth's show. Elizabeth Brawley, Southern Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. She'll be on for an hour tonight, and she's always got a great show. And she's a survivor, and she's done some amazing things in her life, and she helps so many people, and she's just got some great information to bring out to people. So I'm going to try to be in the chat room, and I hope you will be too. Tomorrow morning, same time, same place. One child abuse survivor to another, and then tomorrow night, a couple of different shows. Dreamcatchers Talk Radio, same time, same place, and then my own show. So take care, everybody. Have a great day. Just keep reaching out. Don't give up. Never, ever, ever give up. I made that decision. I made that choice to win this fight. I'm winning this fight. Why? Because I'm going to stay alive, and I'm going to learn to heal and to love myself and to love this life and to help as many people as I can along the way, right? So, we have to make that decision to fight to live and to fight to love ourselves. And this is a fight that I took on, and I'm so glad that I did, because I'm winning this fight, right? I'm going to win this one. I'm going to come out 100% victorious in this, and I hope that you will too. And I just hope and pray that you will come along and join in on it. You know what I mean? So take care, everybody. Get a hold of me if you need something. Blog Talk Radio here or Facebook or whatnot. I'll be around tonight. And take good care of yourselves, and we'll be talking to you real soon. Bye bye.